Since the beginning of the Brony fandom, a question has been lingering over the series, always hanging over the narrative of the stories they are present in like a wet towel, constantly rearing its ugly head and raising more questions than answers. Many have tried to form a solid hypothesis on the subject. Only a few have come to any solid conclusions. Today, I will take on the lofty task of answering this question.
Just what the fuck are the Wonderbolts supposed to be? I mean, are they a sports team, a military unit, a flying group? What the hell are they? But after lots of deep thinking, I've come to the conclusion that they are, in fact, a sports team. No, I'm not biased! Just let me explain. First off, they aren't a military corps, or at least let's hope they aren't a military corps, because if they are the worst military unit in the history of any military. Seriously, these guys have no discipline. Just look at their actions in Rainbow Falls. What kind of military unit would abandon one of their members and try to sneak in a new member behind that guy's back? On the other hand, if they were a sports team, it would make a little more sense, since in sports, players are relatively interchangeable. I mean, wasn't that the entire plot of Moneyball? Sure, there's some camaraderie in the locker room, but the players understand that it's a business and the goal is to make the unit better. Sticking with Rainbow Falls, there are very few instances of soldiers competing in the Olympics, but there are plenty of examples of professional athletes competing in the Olympics, since presumably A, the soldiers would be too busy with their duties to train, and B, if something were to get attacked during the games, the soldiers would have to abandon their game to serve. However, professional athletes usually fill most of the spots in an Olympic event anyway, so their being a sports team would be logical. Then there's a quick scene in Sweet and Elite where there's a quote-unquote Wonderbolt Derby. If that's a military group, it'd be kind of out of the ordinary, but as a sport, especially a sport that people seem to bet on a lot, it makes perfect sense. After all, horse racing is one of the most bet-on sports in the world. Now, the most common instance cited by people who believe that the Wonderbolts are a military unit is pretty much all of Wonderbolts Academy. But the only thing I could find that would suggest that the Wonderbolts were definitely a military group is that Spitfire has military awards on her shirt, similar to those you might find in heavily accommodated soldiers. But here's the problem. We've seen the Equestrian Military Force, and they look more like knights than Wonderbolts. Plus, there's plenty that suggests they either aren't trying to represent or are poorly representing a military force in that episode. These officers don't stand at attention properly, they don't salute properly, although that may just be due to a lack of hands. And Spitfire is noticeably non-threatening in certain scenes, and non-threatening is a word that I wouldn't exactly link to a drill instructor. It's all just kinda nebulous. But if the Wonderbolt Academy isn't a military boot camp, then what exactly is it? My theory is that the Wonderbolt Academy is equal parts sports camp and open tryout. I actually attended a football camp when I was younger, and it was hosted by the Oakland Raiders. And it was kind of similar to the stuff that happened at the Wonderbolt Academy. Lots of working out, a few organized competitions between the cadets, and personal training from the professional players. And at the same time, at the Academy, if the ponies proved that they were the best of the best, they might get a recommendation to join the Wonderbolts themselves, which would be how they would recruit new Wonderbolts. And such a method was hinted at in the alternate ending of this episode. Some people bring up the Wonderbolts' actions in Secret of My Excess as a sign of their military status, since they seem to act as an air force of sorts. However, I will point to the fact that there's no evidence stating that the Wonderbolts were ordered to confront Spikezilla. They could have very easily said something like, "Hey, there's a giant dragon attacking Ponyville, let's go kick its ass." Which would fit the cocky attitude if you're a typical professional athlete. Besides, there are plenty of other instances where Ponyville and other towns are being attacked without the Wonderbolts in sight. Okay, so they aren't a military unit. But what about a flying team like the Blue Angels, you might ask? They did seem to get characterized as that in early episodes in the series, and when asked if he thought the Wonderbolts were inspired by the Blue Angels in 2011, series director Jason Theazin answered, "Yeah, I think they are." However, one thing that should be noted is that the Blue Angels are members of the military, and I just spent 650 words explaining why they aren't a military unit. Plus, as the series goes along, the instances where the Wonderbolts resemble the Blue Angels begin to disappear. I think the last time the Wonderbolts flew with a smoke trail behind them, like you would see in an aerial show, was the Season 1 finale. Since then, they've gotten more characterization, and the aerial flying team idea has steadily disappeared, being replaced by that of a group of jocks. Megan McCarthy tweeted that Season 4 would tell us whether or not the Wonderbolts were a military unit. So far, their only appearance this season has been in Rainbow Falls. Before that episode, I naturally assumed that the Wonderbolts were just a military corps, but their depiction in that episode seems to contradict that. As a result, I'm confident in my assessment that the Wonderbolts are not soldiers, not professional flyers, but professional athletes. Thank you, and I'll see y'all later.